Right, this is Bath in roughly the first part of the 19th century. The population at that time was already 50,000. And I think, Bath population now is probably about 95,000, something like that. It's not, not much bigger. But interest in Bath itself had already waned slightly by the time we get to the second quarter of the 19th century, because bathing at the seaside was the latest craze. So obviously gambling, cavorting and parading were taking place at a different geographical location. So let's talk about the background to the Bath Royal Literary and Scientific Institution. Edmund Rack sort of founded effectively the agricultural society, which was encouragement of agriculture, planting, manufactures, commerce, and the fine arts. The Bath Philosophical Society took shape in 1779, which subsequently then joined and morphed into the BRLSI. And what you see here is an old picture of Bath from the 1850s. And if you look on the left-hand side of that picture, that edifice there in front of the Abbey is where the original building of the BRLSI stood. In fact, it was actually known as the lower assembly rooms in Terrace Walk. So this was around sort of the late 18th century. Now, what happened was in 1819, Dr. Edward Barlow actually proposed for a learned institution to be established in Bath as a sort of front runner to the Bath Royal Literary and Scientific Institution. Now, unfortunately, the lower assembly rooms burned down in 1820. And it was Dr. Henry Woods who actually requested Lord Manvers, who was the owner of the grounds on which the assembly room stood, to rebuild it. And a public funding was arranged and shareholding was arranged, and particularly was led by Hastings Elwin, one of the key founders of this institution, which I will talk about in a bit more detail. And so the institution started, and in 1824, by deed of trust. In 1825, on the 19th of January, it was opened by the Duke of York and the Duke of Clarence, who was going to be King William IV, as patrons, and the Marquis of Lansdowne as president, and Hastings Elwin as chairman. The first lecture was held on the 21st of January 1825 by Sir George Smith Gibbs. And I had the great honor on the 21st of January 2025 to give the first lecture of the 3rd century of BRLSI on a slightly more worrying topic, and that was democracy under attack. And you can find that talk now on the BRLSI YouTube, and I would hasten you to visit that, because the YouTube, our website, our channel there, has now something like 500 videos as a sort of long-lasting legacy to this institution. Okay, so the location was Terrace Walk, and it was, as I said, was known as the lower assembly rooms. Another key people who were involved in making this financially possible were the Duncan brothers, and this is the Duncan room. So these two portraits of these two gentlemen here are actually instrumental to actually include the initial financing of the institution in 1824. However, even in those days, the institution was basically started by ladies as well. We have Mrs. Prime, Miss S. Prime, Lady Wright, and Lady Keane, who were instrumental in actually getting the BRLSI off the ground. So from the very, very beginning, ladies were at the center of this august institution. So this is the other view of the the institution. And this is basically North Parade. So you can imagine you're going down North Parade, and just as you turn right towards the Empire, this is roughly where the original building stood. And it was very quickly decided that in 1825, in fact, the Bath and West Agricultural Society passed its mineral collection to the BRLSI. Francis Lockie, another individual after which one of the rooms downstairs is named, added a photography collection. And in 1827, the Corporation of Bath deposited its Roman collection with the BRLSI, which was not returned until 1897, when the Roman baths reopened. And history will probably tell us that the trustees of the BRLSI at the time weren't necessarily overly keen to return the Roman artifacts to the council. But that's another story for another day. In 1834, the institution laid out its botanical gardens. So what is now Parade Gardens used to be known as the institutional gardens. So it's actually part of the BRLSI. And I think if you walk along North Parade and just by the Empire, there's still a plaque that talks about the history of those gardens. So again, when you're walking through Bath, please have a look at that. And for our bicentenary, we've now actually got a display, a panel display in Parade Gardens that actually traces the history of the BRLSI from its early beginnings to the current phase. So if you're excited about this particular talk, you can find out additional stuff in Parade Gardens. Okay. In 1859, finally, the building was bought by the institution from Lord Manvers, which actually was quite interesting, because between 1824, 1825, and 1859, even at that time, the finances of the institutions were quite precarious. Yes, this is a recurring feature of all the literary and scientific institutions. Success was never guaranteed. So actually, the fact that we're here 200 years later is actually a testament to all the people who've come before us to actually make this institution what it is today. In 1854, Charles Moore donated his fossil collection to the BRLSI, 32 ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, 2,700 large specimen, and many, many more small specimen. And actually, there is a cast of one of the plesiosaurs in the room next door, which I think is not available today. But a lot of the specimen are actually being loaned out to the Museum of Wales, where they are to this date, and which we may want to recover at some point if we're going to open a public museum here for the people of Bath and beyond in the future. Leonard Jennings also bestowed his library to us, some 1,200 to 2,000 volumes. And obviously, Leonard Jennings is famous for his relationship with Charles Darwin. And we have a copy of the first edition of the Origin of Species downstairs in the foyer, which you might want to look at when you leave. And we've also got lots of correspondence between Jennings and Darwin as part of our collection. Good. And as I said, many other institutions in Bath sort of associated and actually played a role within the lower assembly rooms, the institutional in this building. Particularly things like the Literary and Philosophical Society, the Natural History and Antiquarian Field Club, the Microscopical Society, the Selborne Society, and the Photographic Society. So even in those early days, it wasn't just people who were members of the BRLSI. BRLSI at that time was open to the public. It was open to what they described in 1825, the working classes. And I think what's even more interesting, that all the content and all the lectures weren't necessarily generated by the BRLSI themselves, but also associated institutions, which is still the case today. So you look at the edifice here, and then if you look at the interior, you will see what the interior would have been like with all the specimen displayed for the public, etc., as well as the library and things like that. And if you look at the oblong shapes on the ceiling, they were actually the Casali paintings from Andrea Casali, who were actually used to be at Fontmill Mansion, Beckford's Mansion, and were subsequently, 4 of them were bestowed to the BRLSI. I think there's another 5 currently at Derham Park, and they've been now transported from the institutional area by Parade Gardens to this present location, and are located in the Elgin Room. So the big move. The big move happened in 1932 because the old building was demolished to give way for a new road system to connect North Parade to the Empire. So planning permission, obviously at that time, wasn't what it is today. And knocking down a Grade 1 listed building, I think would probably have an issue in today's world. But at that point, clearly, the establishment of the Empire Club Empire Hotel was seen as something fundamentally important. And instead, we were offered 3 Georgian townhouses in Queen Square, which you see in front of you. And the Bath City Council bought these, and then also erected a museum or a display room called the Moore Room, which is actually visible through this room here at the back of the courtyard, which is currently tenanted by some commercial tenants. That was designed initially to hold part of our collections. And so the story continues that actually in 1940, so this is where things go awry after the initial foundation. Obviously, we move here in 1932. The First World War starts in 1939. The Admiralty moves in 1940 and doesn't leave until 1959, at which point Bath Corporation is the sole trustee. In 1964, the reference library opens to the public, and I'm sure some of you may still remember the reference library here at the BRLSI. Bath Geological Society is founded in 1967, and in 1968 the BRLSI is registered with the Charity Commission as an educational charity. Now, the reference library doesn't actually move out until 1987, when it is moved to the podium, its current location. Now, in 1974, with local government reorganization, the trusteeship was transferred to the new formed Avon County Council. Now, is anybody from the council here in the room? No, we let you off. We let you off. Because the next part of the story is actually quite fascinating. It's because the institution after the war became more or less moribund. There weren't many members left. And actually the BRLSI subsequently was saved by effectively 2 ladies who actually still remember the BRLSI as an educational charity, as something to be revered, something to be protected. And in the early 1980s, started to really have discussions with the council, which ended up in a potential court case, which was eventually actually settled out of court. Now, those 2 ladies, Stella Peirce and Martha Inskip, were fundamental to the success. They were supported by Dr. Dorothy Speed, and also other individuals like Michael King and Carl Jaeger were fundamental to actually raise the profile of this institution. And this is something that went on for the best part of a decade, this kind of wrangling as to what it was. Because the reasons why they were concerned is because the council were looking at the building and were going to redevelop the building and only keeping the facade of Queen Square. And they're also going to disperse all the different collections into all sorts of different places. And it was only those individuals I've just mentioned who were really going to town with the council to prevent that happening. And I think it was Martha Inskip who remembers when she was interviewed by Elizabeth Vincent, who's actually on this online today. So big thanks to you, Elizabeth, for writing about the BRLSI. There's actually the history of the BRLSI. There's a leaflet there which you could buy afterwards if you want to, which gives much more detail about the history of this place. But thank you, Elizabeth, for detailing that all for us. But it was those ladies who actually made the difference. And I think it was Martha Inskip, when she memorized all the things that were going before, when she was interviewed by Elizabeth, that she thought that the council thought of her and Stella as two dotty old ladies who had absolutely no gravitas to be able to pull off what they pulled off. And what they pulled off, the council in 1993 settled for a settlement of £640,000. So not only is ownership very firmly vested in the BRLSI, the ladies also threatened to take the council to court for back payment of rent for about 35 years, which actually gave the institution a financial security they could only dream of. And to this day, we have this money invested, right, as a keepsake when things are tough. So really, this is the sort of background to where it has come from. In 1992, it started again, open to the public with 400 members. And I think I'm right in saying we're at the cusp, if not today, probably over the next week, to actually exceed 1,000 members, probably for the first time in our history. So that's a great achievement, and thank everybody in Bath for actually regarding this place as something that is special, something that's important, and something to be cherished for the future. Okay, so that's the past. So I want to talk to you now about a little bit about the present and what we actually do here at the institution. It's quite interesting because I'm seeing lots of members here. So most of you will probably know what we do here and what we've got here, but I think it's always good to remind ourselves in terms of how special this place really is. So I've already alluded to our collections. Now we have 160,000 items or so downstairs in the basement, ably looked after by Matt Williams, our curator, whose life over the last 20 years or so has been absorbed going through boxes, arranging research with people from all over the globe who want to research the artifacts that we have in the bowls, preserving and conserving all those items, cataloging them, and making sure that most of them can be available for research also digitally online. So, you know, the range of this is quite astounding. It covers paleontology, it covers the minerals collection, which I talked about earlier. It covers things like human history, which includes things like weaponry. We've got the library from Leonard Jennings bestowed on us with 3,000 volumes. We've got natural history. We've got details about invertebrates and vertebrates, which we talked about already. And lots of detail around humanities and human history, particularly as part of the photography volumes that we have. So a lot of things that really hardly ever come in. No, didn't want to join. That's fine. That's fine. Okay, so these items never really see the light of day. I mean, Matt and his team are great. That for about 6 months every year, there is an exhibition downstairs in the Jennings room that brings out, you know, bits and pieces of the collection that actually are themed. Petrification is the one this time. We've got sort of deep dive into history and things like that, based on the meteorite that we've got downstairs, which is 4.2 billion years old. So every year there is an exhibition of some sort. But it's going to be impossible to actually display 160,000 items all the time. But I will talk about that in a little bit more detail when we actually get into the potential future. Okay, our cultural talks program. So that is probably one of the most visible things that the BRLSI does. And that's the talks program and its variety of information. And this goes back to the very beginning of the literary and philosophical and scientific institutions in this country and beyond. Because in the late 18th century, things changed across Europe as well. All of a sudden, the idea that you only have the landed gentry and the clergy and the peasants, started to dissolve, and actually the middle classes started to emerge, who wanted to be entertained in coffee houses and have free discussions about the politics of the time, the economics, science, literature, the arts, etc. And these are direct forerunners of what the BRLSI and all the other literary and scientific institutions or philosophical societies in the UK were based on. And emerging, not a break from just clergy and gentry and the peasantry, to an immersion of some inquiring minds. That's why to this day, one of the things that we say, our promise really, is that we want to inspire minds. That's our promise to people in Bath and beyond going forward. People want to be inspired by the past, by the present, but also what's to come. So here's the talks program. I've just listed here, these are all examples of the various interest groups we've got, and anything from Adelaide all the way down to world affairs and everything in between, covering philosophy, covering science, covering the humanities and literature, etc. We do about 140 talks a year now. And I think since the pandemic, we've actually gone online as well. So we've actually got hybrid talks. So I'm giving this talk as much online now as I'm doing it to the audience in the room, which is great, which has actually helped us to reach much wider audiences. The first time we did this, I remember well, and it's timely because today is obviously, we've got the Jane Austen Festival going on. And actually, we've had talks here, online talks here on Jane Austen. I remember one of our earliest talks was a hybrid talk with the Jane Austen festival we ran here during the pandemic. So people could only join online, which was interesting. But we had people join from all over the world. We had people from South America, we had people from Japan, etc. But what was hilarious, these were the early days of Zoom, where people weren't quite used to Zoom yet. So it was interesting because there was arguments, familial arguments going on in the background as the lecture was going on. Nobody quite knew exactly how to mute everybody. Yeah, so that was interesting. And there, every so often people and showed their video. They weren't supposed to show the video, but we had people sitting there in different degrees of undress. We had people knitting, especially during the Jane Austen Festival, which I thought was quite interesting. So unfortunately, these days are past. I think it's a shame actually, because I think we learned a lot during the early days of doing the hybrid talks, and it was a great deal of fun. So yes, there's lots of things here. And the other thing about this institution is we, for some reason, never pay speakers. Speakers come to us, and these are world-renowned experts in their fields sometimes coming here. Like the Christmas lecture this year is Professor A.C. Grayling, right? A world-renowned philosopher who's going to give a talk about finding peace in the culture wars as a part of our Christmas lecture. These people all turn up for free. Most of them don't even charge expenses because they fundamentally believe there is an inherent value in institutions like this to share information, to share knowledge, to explore what is currently going on in the world and where the world is tracking. So they think it's very important. And then we've also got, talked about that, we've also got publications. And again, a lot of people have been invested and have been part of this. This is all volunteer-led. So we've got a book on Adelaide, which is currently also on display in the Abbey. We've got this leaflet here, a pamphlet here about the history of the BRLSI. We've got books and proceedings on the Nile explorers, Saving the Dodo. I'm reliably informed, I've never seen it, but I think we have some feathers of a dodo somewhere in the institution. I haven't seen it personally, so I can't corroborate that, but I think there's bits of dodo in the basement. We've also got the left, a publication on Darwin's lifelong friend, Leonard Jennings, and there's many more publications and proceedings that we have issued in the past. So that's the cultural program. But we also do lots of other things. So, I mean, obviously our membership I talked about, which is really, really important. And I'm really delighted that we are going back to our roots to some extent and doing learning and knowledge, not just for adults, but also for children. And I think, you know, there's people in this room like Joe Wilson here, for example, who's been instrumental in helping us with things like Brilliantly Engineered and the youth program, and bringing that back to life, because that really is part of the reason why we exist. You know, it is really the promotion of arts, the sciences, and literature that we're here for, but it's for everybody. And you know, if one thing we have learned over time is actually cultural education is so important. It needs to start young because it will have an impact on people's lives very, very early on, and it stays with you throughout your life. But there's things like, you know, we've got the 1,000 members, we've got the Academy of the Imagination, which is run by Becky Thorburn, and we interact with children, you know, aged anywhere from 7 to 11. We've got the sixth form philosophy seminars, so again, part of our philosophical history. It's really important to involve sixth formers in equipping them with critical reasoning skills and broader perspective on life, because they're at the cusp of either going into a job, into an apprenticeship, or going to university. So it's trying to equip them with something that they wouldn't normally get in education in their schools. And actually the next lot of sixth form seminars is about to start on the 8th of October. It's 6 weeks talking about the value of values. What are values? Where do we get them from? Right? How do we interact with people with different values? Which is quite apt in the world today. And yes, and then we've got bathtubs into science, we've got family activities, we've got Cafe Philo every so often, where people are invited to come in, not to listen to a lecture, but to be part of an ongoing multilogue about a particular issue. Yeah, like, is world peace possible? Question mark. And that always gets quite rowdy, because you can imagine how many different opinions might people have about world peace. So that's good. We've also do members trips, like Bowood, for example, last year. And there's some experiential days for kids and adults alike. So that's just some of the things we do. The other things, aspect of this, is not all just cultural, but we also rent our rooms for functions. And this is the Duncan room. This is the second biggest room. The biggest room is next door, the Elwyn room. We've got the Lonsdale room also, and we've got the Draper room, named after the great Bob Draper, who lived, and basically, I always accuse him. Does anybody know Bob Draper? Obviously the members do. I mean, he basically was the operational genius behind this institution. This institution wouldn't have worked in the last 20, 30 years without Bob. Because Bob was a volunteer who dedicated his life to this place, and he never seemed to leave. I actually accused him of having some cubbyhole downstairs in the basement, which he sort of retired to at night and then surfaced again, like sort of some Dracula the next morning, and actually got things running. It's amazing. The amount of time and effort that he put in is amazing. And I didn't realize, I spoke to about him when he passed, and we had a sort of memorial service here at the BRLSI. I didn't realize he was a bouncer at Moulton nightclub. I mean, I would have never assumed a gentle person like Bob Draper, who couldn't hurt a fly, as a bouncer in a Bath nightclub. But there you go. Okay, so the rooms are all for hire, and what we're obviously trying to do is for them to be hired. If it's commercially, we've also got charity rates, but we want people to be like-minded, you know, have something in common with the BRLSI ethos to book these rooms. And that's why we offer discounts for charities like ourselves. And one of the biggest challenges is that actually is getting the room occupancy rates up. Yeah, because I think we're normally quite busy at night, for example, tonight, but then during the day, there's ebb and flows, which James and the team working hard to make sure we fill even more than we do at the present. And obviously refreshments. So again, one of the things that we sort of lapsed during the pandemic is actually our overall offering to the people of Bath, because it's all about amenities, isn't it? It's about when you come to a place, you want to be able to have a drink, you might even want to have a little snack. So we're working hard to sort of make that a reality as well, rather than just having a one offering like a talk. So I think it's important to broaden our offer. Okay, right, onto the future and onto the present. I just wanted to share with you the vision of this institution. And this is based on our charitable objects as a charity. So we are here ultimately for the care and promotion of its museum, library, and archive collections for the benefit of the public, one. Secondly, for the provision of lectures, exhibitions, and other facilities, again, written into our constitution, basically. And also the promotion of research and learning shared for all through various media. That's what we're really here for. But how does that express itself in terms of what we want to be known for? So our vision is to be an inspiring, inclusive, and enlightening experience. Now, we want people to walk away from here feeling that they have learned something, or they feel slightly differently about how they felt previously. Just a bit of information, or just a feeling of something different. Our mission is to share knowledge and stimulate exploration of science, literature, and the arts, enriching the quality of life for Bath residents and visitors. Yeah, that's what we're here to do. And we've also got our values, and we find that is very important. Any institution needs to live what it's promising. Our promise to you is to be inspiring minds. In terms of how we do that, it's really by being inviting, by being inclusive, by being ambitious about the future, about enriching our cultural content, and also work collaboratively with others. Because as I mentioned at the very beginning, when this institution started, it wasn't just about the BRLSI, it was actually other people also doing things at the BRLSI, the geographical societies, etc. So, and then this translates into our current strategy, which is creating a leading cultural brand that is recognized. And that's important because it's amazing what a secret the BRLSI still is. I mean, I always remember this. I gave a talk at the Bath Rotary Club actually did it twice. Last time was about 3 years ago. The one before that was 5 years ago or 6 years ago. And nobody at the Bath Rotary Club at the time knew about the BRLSI. Not one. And you would have thought, if you look at the age profile, the socio-demographic profile of that institution and ours, it would have been a complete overlay. No. So, attracting new people to this institution is really, really critical. And that's why, we need to build the brand more, especially now we're actually international. Because what is nice about the hybrid talks, for example, not only do people join and watch from abroad, we've now also got the capability of attracting world-class speakers who may not turn up in person, but are beamed into the Elven Room, for example, from anywhere. So that happens every year with my series on the Ukraine, where 2 professors beam in from 2 different locations in America, one from New York and one from California. So that's interesting. And we've got the same, the next one I think is Machiavelli on the 22nd of September. So, this all helps. The second one is recognized as a leading cultural hub. So being a cultural hub is really a mission of ours. We want to be a hub, which means not just being there for ourselves, but we want to attract collaborative institutions, whether it's the Holborn, whether it's the Museum at Work, whether it's the Herschel Museum. we want to bring all cultural activities into the BRLSI to sort of make this a real thriving institution for everyone. Digital transformation, as you can see, we were on our way with digital transformation, but it was very clear from our little hiccup this early on that we still got things to learn. This place here, for example, this room is not digitally equipped to the same standard as the Elwyn room. And I know that James and his team are still working hard to make that a reality. So we've got a slightly more sort of transparent way of operating. And then obviously implementing a sustainable business model and governance, which again is key. As I said to you earlier, from the very beginning, it was tough getting the funds together to actually start this institution in 1824. It then became difficult again in the late 1850s to keep it going and so forth. And even when we moved here in 1932, it looked up a bit. But I think people at that time, the amount of trustees who complained about the move from Terrace Walk, the lower assembly rooms, to this place was amazing. They felt that they've been yanked out of this heart of the city and deposited here in Queen Square. So obviously they didn't take kindly to 3 Grade 1 Georgian edifices. They wanted to stay where they were. And even to this day, even as close as about 15 to 20 years ago, there was a campaign to rebuild the BRLSI on Bog Island. So there you go. Yes, so I think it's really important that we take this seriously. And the last one, implementing a sustainable business. I want to pay homage for a moment to Joe Wilson, who's in the audience, who's done a huge amount of work to actually sort of stabilize the finances of this institution, find new revenue sources, look at the cost base. And I think we're in a so much better place as a result of his hard work. So thank you, Joe. Good, and into the future. One more, and then I'm finished. So this is my manifestation of the future. So let's start. So this is my personal, and I think it's been now validated by the board. I'm sure Joe might have other views in the Q&A session, but I think it's important to share this with people. And the first thing is a public museum. You know, our charitable aims states the maintaining of a museum. We have museum accreditation, which we're going through again. Every 10 years, you need to do it re-accredited. So that's happening in the months to come, and we need to fill out various papers and things like that. We'll do that. But then we need to actually be true to our sign above the door, which says museum, and actually become a publicly accessible museum on a permanent basis. At the moment, we're doing it by exhibitions every 6 months, bringing our sort of limited treasures up. One of the biggest things that the board is currently looking at is how do we make it possible for a permanent public museum to exist in these 3 Georgian townhouses. Because I think that will make a massive difference to the people of Bath, you know, in terms of natural and human history, and also to the youngsters who would really benefit from actually learning much more about the past. So that would include things like the permanent exhibitions, special exhibitions, partnerships with other institutions that I mentioned, conservation efforts to actually make sure that the collections are housed in modern cases, etc., and are protected from deterioration, and actually encourage research. So that's the public museum. The other one is the Center for Culture, and that is really the talks program and other cultural activities I've mentioned. Youth activities are key to this, as well as the membership. You know, the membership is really being supportive, and without our members, we would be nowhere, because they are our biggest supporters, not just financially, but actually also in spirit and being vocal in terms of what this institution stands for. And we want to be a public forum for people to be able to express their opinions freely. We are completely apolitical. So this isn't a political venue, but people should be able to express their opinions, whatever they are, in a public forum so they can be questioned. You know, that's part of the key tenets of free speech. Yeah, it's not just good what you want to hear. Because if you always do what you always done, you always do what you always will do. So we need to have diversity in our midst. Then some of the commercial stuff, we want to have room hire continuing. We want to have a cafe in this place so people can actually avail themselves of the amenities properly. We want to have a shop to actually sort of offer bits and pieces of our history, information about booklets, our publications, for people to sort of take something home. And we also want to run workshops where people can actually experience what science, literature, and the arts really is all about with a hands-on experience rather than just reading it third hand. Good. And then on the final side, community partnerships, and that's what I finished with, is really, as I mentioned at the beginning, this is about bringing other cultural institutions and other organizations into the BRLSI to be a thriving cultural hubs, from youth programs to joint programs to sponsorships by even institutions and corporate entities. They all have a role to play for the future of the organization, of the institution, and helping us to inspire minds for the next 200 years. Thank you very much. Right, we're now getting to the Q&A session. And Colin, you're kind enough to wield the microphone with our little, you do have to, yes. Share and see whether there's anybody online.
Going to say I'll break the ice, Andreas. Well, just one quick clarification on something you said. The out of court settlement we got from the council, about half of it was spent refurbishing the building. So just in case people think we've got a huge amount of money in the bank, it's, because lots of members do look at the figures in the accounts and then think we've got more money than we have, because a lot of it's locked up in the building. Thank you very much. Very enlightening. I've enjoyed BRLSI for many years and other LSIs. I mean, there were 250 something of them in the 1800s, of which there's just a handful now. And I like your vision for the future. Would you like to say more about things like how we might do things like a museum? I mean, one of the great challenges, for those who don't know me, I'm a former chair of the finance committee here, has always been the challenge that, for example, the rooms we rent out downstairs on a long-term lease have been vital to be able to balance the books. And it would be absolutely wonderful to be able to have those as an exhibition space. And so could you talk a bit more about how that might be allowed to happen?
Which I think is quite interesting. We have two members of the finance committee here, one current and one past. Are you still present? Oh, well, okay. Even more. Well, the whole finance committee is here clearly, and which means I'm going to be very careful what I can say. You're obviously right, Richard, that as far as the £640,000 is concerned, some money has been invested. I mean, I think it's also fair to say that a good chunk of that is still available and being looked at in terms of our investments and things like that. So I think that's good. But I think this place, and Richard is right as a finance man, this place is not cheap to maintain. Every few years we have to spend close enough to a six-figure sum to actually repair things on this building. So, it is something that is costly, but so valuable to the community that that's what we do as guardians of this institution. That's part of our responsibility to keep it going. Yes, as far as the financials are concerned, in terms of where we get our income from, everybody knows that we have got some commercial tenants in. They occupy a certain part of the building. We've got this floor and we've got parts of the ground floor and the basement in terms of our cultural activities, and that mix will always be something that we need to look at. I mean, obviously the upstairs are all rented out to commercial tenants, and we need to understand what will give us the longest sustainable future, and with the aim of actually making this a cultural institution. Because, I mean, it would be so easy to rent out most of these rooms to commercial tenants. And then effectively, the BRLSI would become a property management company rather than a cultural institution, a cultural charity. So we do need to tread very carefully. We need to make sure we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater and we have a sustainable future. But I think we are only scratching the surface of what is possible in this place. You know, we've been running the institution since it was reformed in the 1990s, really on a very similar basis for the last 30 years. You know, when I first joined, I thought, this is a bit like a private members club, really. You know, this is a bit like sort of shutters and doors shut. And, you know, you didn't really get invited to come into this institution, right? It was actually something behind closed doors, and you had a membership, and they were treated to some talks and maybe some artifacts every so often. And this has been going on for 30 years. So we've come to the conclusion that there is a richer, fuller future possible for the institution. And obviously, we need to make sure that that gets done within a cost envelope that is sustainable. But yeah, I mean, the plan is definitely, the idea is that we become more culturally centered and actually provide more cultural artifacts, activities, and room for the public in Bath and beyond. Was that not too definitive, Joe? Okay, well, in that case, do you want me to be more specific? Good. Okay.
Well, shall I ask you a question on a similar theme then? So the 6-month exhibitions you put downstairs when you move a related collection of objects and collect the display materials, have you ever thought that that might be offered as a sort of touring exhibition to offer to other institutions rather than running it as your own museum?
Yeah, good question. I think I'm sure it has been considered, but I think that is a huge endeavor. I mean, yeah, the beauty of this place is that actually it is a volunteer organization. I mean, I think we've got something like 5 or 6 FTE, full-time equivalent staff, and the rest are all volunteers. And we've got one curator, Matt, downstairs looking after 160,000. So actually the idea of on an ongoing basis to do this is not easy. I mean, obviously a lot of our stuff, a lot of our artifacts, including the full-scale ichthyosaurs and plesiosaurs, are currently at the Museum of Wales and have been loaned out. And we did loan out things to the Holborn, for example, and things like that. But not at a sort of traveling exhibition to different places. But Joe may well want to correct me.
Continuing the theme from Richard. So if we are able to expand the space we have, then we can exhibit our own collection. We can potentially have visiting collections come here, you know, from the Royal Institution or wherever. And there are companies who will do the work to build a traveling exhibition of our collection and then commercially tour that around the UK. So they're all different ways of using our space and using our collection that we're looking at as part of the strategic planning. But, you know, it's a bit like, you know, asking for directions in Ireland. You know, the answer is often, well, you wouldn't start from here. So getting from here to where we'd like to be is the question. So that's what we're working on.
Do you want to come back first?
Yeah, so Joe's absolutely right. I mean, I was commenting on the past rather than what is to come. So Joe's absolutely right. I mean, in order to be a cultural hub, you know, it's not just about what you do here, but actually how you spread the message to other institutions. So absolutely spot
on. Hi. Bath is very lucky to be home to so many great schools. I was lucky to go to school here in Bath, and now I'm a professional. I was just wondering whether you'd give a bit more information about your school outreach program and those sixth form talks, and about how those are sort of advertised into sort of the schools in Bath, because I think they would have been very useful back in my day. But yeah, I think they sound great, but a bit more information would be great.
Welcome today. Yes, thank you for that. You're absolutely right. So I think the outreach is the younger kids, so Key Stage 2, for example, which are the target for our Academy of the Imagination at the moment. That outreach happens to one individual called Becky, and she's liaising with all the schools in Baines to actually go out to the schools with artifacts from the BRLSI, or to invite schools in to actually look at the exhibition, do some exercises, digging for fossils, doing some games, etc., to learn by doing. It's a bit like the sort of Montessori, Steiner type of approach to learning. But as far as the sixth form philosophy seminars are concerned, it's quite interesting that 2 years ago, we've had our first sixth form student came back and gave a talk himself on philosophy, which is a great achievement. This is what we do this for. Right? This is what we're doing, that people can actually come back and actually deliver and add value, cultural value to this. How we promote that? Again, I'm currently dealing with that myself, and I contact all the schools in Bath and Baines to actually contact their head of sixth form or philosophy teacher or RE teacher to talk to them and invite their students to come along. But they're under pressure. I mean, one of the things we do need to realize is that schools are under a huge amount of pressure with their syllabus. So even when you offer free curriculum, extracurricular activities, there's not always time. So you really need to minimize their requirements. So what I produce for the sixth form, for example, is a leaflet that describes the seminars, the 6 seminars, the content, how to enroll, how to register, and that students can do this both online or in person. But I think, continuing that conversation is vitally important. And I think the more we can do to actually be interfacing with schools. There used to be a Baines education officer. I don't know what happened there, but that went years and years ago. So it's up to the individual institution now to reach out to the schools, which is more labor intensive, but actually more rewarding, because you can actually talk about things in a bit more detail.
Thank you. I understand this is a talk about the future of the BRLSI, and I've just got a question about the past, as one of the things that you put onto the display right at the beginning, the Athenaeum. I noticed it was mentioned, but I was wondering if you could tell a little bit more about what happened to that, what it was, and how it relates to here.
The Athenaeum Club, so Athenaeum, Bath Athenaeum, I don't know the details of the kind of material they bestowed onto the BRLSI. I assume there would have been some artifacts and some volumes of library items, etc. I don't know the specifics. But I think the only thing I know is that they were actually founded in 1825, so the year after the BRLSI. And we actually had the Athenaeum Club of London come and give a talk here in 2024 as part of the bicentenary. But obviously, they can't have owned their property in where the Empire Hotel was going to be built. So I don't know the details. I know that they had to vacate in 1899 to make room for the Empire Hotel, and therefore were subsumed by the Bath Industry and Scientific Institution. I don't know much more about that now. So I mean, I'm sure Elizabeth Vincent, if you're still on the call, she could dig into this and find out more. But I think it would be something that would be definitely worthwhile exploring in terms of the history of all the various institutions that were around at the time of the BRLSI and how they sort of morphed in and related to it. Any more? There's nothing online. There was lots of complaints about not hearing online, which seemed to be resolved when Joe came up last.
Well, if we've got a pause, can I add a bit about the Athenaeum? Just a quick thing on the Athenaeum and the other organisation. I mean, Bath was quite odd in also having a mechanics institute running in parallel. Quite often the mechanics institutes are much more technical. The Athenaeums were like the literary and scientific institutions, which was sort of a bit more upper class. If you go to Fordingbridge and look in their museum, they have a proud statement on their timeline of the history of the town where their mechanics institute matched the criteria for literary and scientific institution. So they had an LSI, which the Fordingbridge residents assumed was a sort of promotion. But a lot of these the LSIs and Athenaeums had tremendous rivalries. Often there were very active, egotistical personalities that had set them up. You see with a lot of LSIs across the country where the rivalries haven't even went to court cases as to who had which area to deal with because they were set up by an individual sponsor. Sometimes very good. I mean, Birkbeck, this guy Birkbeck set up the Birkbeck Literary and Scientific Institution in East London, which is now Birkbeck College. So it's no longer an LSI. But most others had tremendous rivalries. And one of the fascinating things is about how it is the Bath LSI ended up staying in existence when so many others either folded or merged with something else. But I think most of the time that I've seen any of these histories, it's so much personality led as to the rivalries between organizations.
Thanks. On one of the slides, you had the sort of all the range of kind of literary and scientific themes that covered probably about 20 or something. Just wonder if you could say sort of a little bit of just very briefly the history of how those themes kind of came about. They just sort of have they developed over the last 10, 20, 30 years, or and I suppose moving on from that, are there any ideas for newer, different themes at all?
Thank you. Yeah, those 20 sort of images that were on the slide related specifically to the Cultural Talks program and the various different interest groups that they consist in. And I think, even from the very beginning, it was quite varied. So agriculture and geology and microscopy and things like that were part of the initial offering. Anything that people were curious about. Now, the honest answer to your question is that it is actually interested individuals who start these interest groups, right? Again, it's what Richard was saying earlier. This isn't, some grand plan of cultural enrichment, because it's never meant to be. Because as soon as you have a plan, that is, we need to do X, Y, and Z, it becomes quite formulaic and it loses a lot. This is all based on willing individuals, volunteers who think they know a thing or two about certain subjects and actually feel that they're not necessarily the experts, but they have access to experts through their academic life, their professional life, etc., they could invite to come along. And this is why it's actually quite surprising that our interest groups cover Adelard, the first scientist of Bath, from the medieval time, all the way to world affairs, which is the current state of the world. Yeah, so there's obviously a huge amount of different interest groups. But every so often, somebody else pops along and says, well, actually, I would be quite involved. We've got interest from international relations. Somebody is a convener for that. Is about to start doing some talks on that. We had somebody interested in theatre, so we've got a theatre group now, which didn't exist. But I think your question is quite interesting on the basis that most of the offer is really done by people of my age or older. And therefore, that is they have different interest areas, right? So, and we're not really yet at the cusp of generating enough in other interest areas. So, for example, artificial intelligence, which is a huge subject. We had a convener and then that folded. And again, that convener was my age. And I think what you really want is you want subject areas that resonate with younger audiences as well, and actually are delivered by conveners who are much younger than the likes of me and some of our other conveners. Because there's more resonance, you know, with the interest area, but also the convener. So there's lots of things. There's lots of things around technology. There's lots of things around psychology, which we've subsumed within philosophy, but actually, given the mental health crisis in this country and elsewhere, there's more to be said about psychology, which we haven't found a convener for. Artificial intelligence is another one. We don't have a convener currently for climate change, although Stuart is actually doing a lot on sustainability. So there's lots of existential questions, like artificial intelligence and things like climate change and proliferation of weapons and things like that. There's lots of topics that people are concerned about, and mental health is another one, where we are constantly looking for conveners. So if there's anybody in this room who's really got a passion for an interest area that isn't covered by the BRLSI, or knows somebody who does, then please let us know.
I just had an email from Betty Suchar proposing somebody for psychology, so maybe that will come back. But my question is about, yes, it's very exciting hearing about all these new possible convener groups, and psychology might be a new one, but the program already comes into conflict with room hire for getting rooms. So what's the future going to be in terms of the program versus commercial room hire?
Just for clarification, Tony is also the chair of our program subcommittee, who obviously would be very interested in getting an answer to this one. So I think it comes back to Richard's point earlier. So the institution is always trying to sort of thread a fine line between commercial activities and cultural activities to make sure it is financially sustainable and ready for purpose for the future. So I think there's that. However, the program and the room hire are in particular conflict during certain time slots of the day and also of the week. And I think, given that both are massively important to generating revenues for this institution, we need to find a line here as to where the friction, the rubbing up against each other is literally a rubbing up against each other rather than trying to conflict. Now, as we discussed ourselves, the two of us, there's obviously opportunities to do other things like symposia and conferences. There's things like day talks, talks for kids and younger people as part of the school reach out and things like that. So there are things that we need to do. But also, at the moment, we have a complete spread of frequency of interest groups doing talks. So, for example, some interest groups do monthly talks every month, some of them doing quarterly, some of them biannually even, so there's a big spread, and I think we need to find a way where we can understand how we bring the two together. And I think the other thing is room hire could also be adding a cultural element, depending on what those talks and meetings are all about. I mean, they could be a part of the cultural mix for the future. But I know Tony and I will have to work on this in a bit more detail in terms of making sure that both thrive.
Just talk into it.
Oh, straight in, okay. I was looking at your aspirational pyramid, the mission at the top, and it is not a management. You're a management consultant, as I am, and the difference between an aspirational model and an actual management model, which says how you're going to achieve these. You've got all these various activities and absolutely wonderful set of aspirations. But has the Institute done any work on the actual management plan that it needs to formulate in order to actually deliver these aspirations?
Thank you, Colin. Yes, a good point. So I think the answer to that question is as a management consultant, what you normally do is end up just delivering vaporware, slideware to your clients and telling them what they should do, and then you walk away, right? That's the old perception of a management consulting. That's why the strap line for my management consultancy was from fine words to fine deeds. The idea was to stick around and actually implement stuff rather than just leave when you've got an idea. But I think the issue is we've already got a forward plan. So we've got a forward plan for the next 5 years in terms of what we want to achieve and potentially how we want to achieve it. We've also have a new operational structure for the institution where we've actually amalgamated all of the cultural activities under something called Cultural Activities Committee. So the collections, the talks program, and also the youth activities as part of the Academy of Imagination are now under one umbrella to really focus on how we're going to enrich the cultural activities of this institution. But they're joined together with the management committee who looks after the sort of operational management and the commercial activities of the institution. So they work in tandem. So for example, when we sit together next week to talk through the reaccreditation of this institution as a museum, that will have people from both the commercial and from the cultural side to make sure we can actually start pinpointing our ambitions in terms of our future museum as part of our detailed operational plan, what we're going to deliver over the next 3 years. But it's absolutely crucial. Yeah, it is important, but I think it's also important to be flexible. You know, we are normally quite a risk-adverse institution, and you know, we should be able to try things and learn from them, even if they don't work. You know, we need to be slightly less risk-adverse without actually being reckless. We need to be able to have enough bandwidth to try certain things to see whether they work. And that's what the Academy of the Imagination is all about. It's really trying to reinvigorate something that we haven't done properly for a long, long time, which is actually looking at the future generations and giving them some insights and inspire them to dig deeper. No more questions? Okay, I've got one question online. Well, I'm not sure it's a question. I only heard about the BRLSI maybe 5 years ago, despite the fact that I have 4 not adult children who attend local schools since 1988. I feel they lost out hugely by not having at least an introduction to you. They will come to you with loads of ideas of what they want. Go out and at least say hello to them. Oh, that's great. Fantastic. Geraldine, totally up for it. They're all adults now, but that doesn't matter. That's good. And then Geraldine also says, I wonder, couldn't you approach some of your fantastic sixth formers to lead events for primary children? Again, great idea. I'll actually probably raise that first with the teachers as well, because it does help them. I mean, you know, the reason why people turn up from the sixth form philosophy seminars is because they like the subject, but they also like volunteering their time. This is an extracurricular activity. And if they have got time to dedicate more time to younger kids, I think that would be a fantastic idea. So yeah, thank you, Geraldine. Anything else? Wanted to know. Okay, well, look, if there is nothing else, Richard.
I was actually going to say not to ask you something, but to ask members of the audience, because I think you're absolutely right in your comment that BRLSI seem quite closed, that people feel a barrier to coming in. And one of the things I think we need to work better on is somehow smoothing that first entry of anybody into the institution. So I was just interested in if anybody has any reason as to why they have come in, say, to this talk and not talks before, or, you know, are there, and even is there a program? Because somebody, I can't remember now which person it was that asked about the scale of the programs. does anybody, even if they can't convene it, have an idea for a program they feel that their contemporaries would be interested in?
So just rather than standing up in person, maybe they want to come to me and to Richard after the talk. But just to finish off then, thank you very much for making the time in this awful weather to be here in person, to find out about this institution and its 200-year history. I hope I've been able to give you some flashes of what the future might hold, and talking about a cafe, talking about a shop, talking about a public museum for everybody to enjoy and things like that. And making this place much more inclusive and accessible. You know, if you all live in Bath, you have a key role in making that happen. So thank you very much and have a very safe journey home. All the best.